What does Celtic Renewables do?
So Celtic Renewables is a Scottish-based biotechnology company. We use a fermentation process to take biological wastes and residues from existing industries, from food and drink and agriculture, and convert those low-value wastes and residues into high-value, low-carbon, sustainable green chemicals that you use every day of your life. You just don't know that you use them.
Where are you sourcing the feedstock?
So our first plant in Scotland, in Grangemouth, we're using residues from the Scottish whisky industry. It's like one of the biggest and most important industries in the country. Less than 10% of what actually comes out of a distillery is the high-value whisky that the world knows and loves. The rest of the residues are biological input materials that need a home, and we can give them a high-value home by converting those products into something of much more high value. Currently, the chemicals that we make are only available from fossil fuels, oil and gas, and they're used in pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, healthcare, food production. So our vision is to defossilize the world.
So a lot of different applications, and essentially it's the major chemical building blocks in so many of the products that we're making today, right?
So at Celtic Renewables, we sort of pride ourselves as being at the forefront of what we're calling the green chemical revolution. If your starting material is made from a green sustainable resource, then you add that value to the ultimate product at the end. So that whole chemical supply chain, it depends on the base chemicals that you use to start off with. And these are all coming from oil and gas. And until we figure out an alternative way of making those chemicals, we will continue to dig up oil and gas. So you talk about decarbonising the world. My vision and Celtic Renewables is to defossilize.
Absolutely. Because we are made of carbon, right? So we don't want that.
Well, I kind of like to keep going for another few years, you know?
I agree.
Don't totally decarbonise the world.
Celtic Renewables is, at this point, we can call it a successful scale-up. Can you share with us a bit about the journey? How did you get there?
So as most of these biotech innovations, it began as a research project in a university. It was Edinburgh Napier University in Edinburgh. And we worked for a number of years there on a project to check and see, could we adapt a traditional fermentation process, the ABE, acetone butanol ethanol fermentation, which used to be the second biggest fermentation process in the world, and it died out because it couldn't compete with the petrochemical industry, mainly because of the cost of the raw material. Anywhere between 70 and 90% of the cost of production was the provision of the raw material. So my view was to see, could we replace the whole ethos of making things from expensive raw materials and use carbon that's already been generated and exists above the ground. It's been produced by somebody else and has low value. So should we take that as your raw material and then use it to generate these high-value products?
Which otherwise would be incinerated, right?
It depends on the industry and what you're working with whiskey industry. Traditionally, they would give the solid material to cattle. In the summer and the winter, there's a difference in supply and demand there.
Yeah.
As what I like to consider both economic and environmental sustainability to other industries. I see us and the whole bioeconomy as potentially a secondary industry that comes in behind primary industries like agriculture, food and drink. They're making their own products like whiskey or crops that we're going to eat ourselves, but it also generates biological residues. And our objective is to take those residues, which already exist, they've been generated by a primary industry, and see if we can squeeze more value out of them and directly replace petrochemicals with these alternatives.
When looking back at your journey of scaling, what would you say were the key factors to really successfully scale?
The very first step is to make sure you surround yourself with the right people. Everything else is secondary. So because I came up with the idea, it didn't mean that I knew how to run a company. So the very first thing I did was I got in a business partner who didn't know anything about the idea, but he knew how to help me run the company. And then we put in a technical expert and then some business support. It was the four of us that kicked the whole thing off, but it was complementary expertise. And ever since that day, we've grown and expanded the company by adding in complementary values, complementary skills, complementary activities to grow it. I think that's essential for any company. But a biotech company, the specific thing that causes the most pain is to actually take it from the lab into a commercial process, scaling it up and physically taking it out of a lab and into a factory. And that's where you get a marriage between biology and engineering. I'm the biologist, I'm not an engineer. So I knew how the bacteria would behave and came up with the idea to put all these things together and it would work, and it demonstrated that in the lab. That's a very long ways from a commercial entity and having a full-scale factory. And the first phase of that has to do pilot plants, and that's where Biofuel Europe works.
So you scaled first with a scaling partner and not a corporate?
No, we went to Biofuel Europe pilot plants. They were phenomenal. We scaled up our process 1,000-fold at Biobase Europe to go from there to the first biorefinery in the country, which we've now built and is operating, producing chemicals. So that was a 20-fold further increase. You know,
wow.
Now, the size of the factory is huge, but the big jump, the really big jump, was to go from lab scale to pilot scale. And that also gave us the blueprint. How do you design a factory? You know, and like I said, this is where the engineers come in and people who I don't know how to do this.
Sure.
You don't need to know everything. I think the most important thing you do need to know is that you don't know everything.
Is that one of your key advices to founders, to be humble?
It's not so much about humility, it's more practicality. You know, that to realize there's things you don't know how to do. You know, lawyers deal with the legal stuff. Doctors deal with medicine. If you don't get a lawyer, being a doctor. You know, you need to surround yourself with the skill sets of those activities and skills that you need in order to take something out of the lab and into industry.
Looking back, would you have done anything differently in the scaling journey?
Oh, hindsight is a fantastic thing, you know. There's so many mistakes were made along the way, but the old saying, you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes you just have to figure this out as you go along. I would say there's probably one thing, people talk about financing, to access money is very, very difficult. I joke about everybody wants to be first, to be second. If it's innovative, it's new. And European funding, and UK as well particularly, I think is risk averse. And that's the real challenge when you're trying to do something and be first of a kind. The advice I would give, because we did experience this, is we hung on probably too long for money that was never going to come. And especially if you're talking to the big organizations, a day or a week doesn't make that much difference to them. A day and a week is 7 days more money we have to keep the company going. You hemorrhage money the whole time long. So maybe we should have been a bit braver on cutting our losses at certain points at times, which as a startup is a very difficult thing to do. It's probably the other bit of advice. This is all consuming. So when you are trying to do this, don't let it consume you. You know, I missed too many birthdays and too many occasions that seemed the right thing to do at the time, but cumulatively you look back and you go, I can't even remember what meeting was so important that day that I couldn't be there. So don't lose yourself in the whole process and keep time, because you'll burn out anyway. You know, there's a lot of sleepless nights involved in trying to do this kind of stuff. For all the innovators who are here at the conference and those who aspire to doing something for the next 10, 20, 30 years, which they need to look after themselves. There was a great expression somebody said once, that nobody ever lost a fight because they got knocked down. They lost the fight because they didn't get back up. So that's kind of what you need to do, and keep getting back up. But as I said, within reason, look after yourselves. So any of your listeners who are trying to set things up, try and balance the books a little bit. Perfection all the time isn't necessary. You know, if it works, it works. And there comes a point in time where you need to realize this is good enough. I use an analogy. When you're getting innovation like this, you come and you say, I've got this solution. I can build a bridge to the promised land. You know, I can do this always to where we'll have perfection. In our case, we'll be able to make these chemicals from something no one's ever done this before. I can build this bridge to the promised land. If you get caught up in perfection, you'll build a pier, not a bridge, and it'll never get to the promised land because you're too caught up in building the best you can. Make the worst bridge in history, but get there. Get there. You know, you can fix the bridge afterwards. You know, but get there. We have achieved something that hasn't been done before. First of a kind. All the people in the room need to know that this can and must happen. I've seen too many other companies fail as well. You know, in America, they have a much healthier attitude to companies not working. They see it as a badge of honor, like, hey buddy, I tried this, and you know what? I blew it.
But now I know better, right?
Now I better, and I go do it again. Whereas here it's kind of an embarrassment. Maybe in the UK more so. You know, sort of, dear, can't talk about that. But that's where you learn things. You learn more from getting things wrong than you ever do from getting things right.
But gosh, how can we change that? That's such a big thing, no? To really try to change culture. I mean, just looking at the UK, it's so ingrained, right? To be very understated.
I think if you can incentivize people and go, don't worry about the failure, we'll still be okay. A friend of mine is a venture capitalist, and he look at thousands of business plans, seriously consider hundreds, and then maybe invest in 10. 2 are gone, finished before the ink is dry. Maybe 6 will live, he calls the land of the living dead. They'll keep a few people in a job for a while. He'll never make anything out of it. If the 2 of them that are in there that make money come to the fore, and 2 out of all of that makes money. That's good. We have a tendency to look at the 2 that went under and the 6 that never really made it. Whereas if you really want to get this work, you need to look at the 2 successes, and everything else is our attempt to find those 2. You spoke very eloquently yesterday about the linear economy that we have right now. It's not sustainable. You know, and I think everybody trying to teach people about climate change is pointless. The world is flat. Right?
It's a lot about how you actually frame that. How do you communicate that? When I try to explain what circular economy or biocircular economy is, it's hard because, you know, it's quite a complex system that we need to rethink. But at the end of the day, it is actually just absurd that we have been running only on linear systems, right? We spend so much money on procuring materials and resources, and then once they reach the end of their life, we throw them away, we burn them, we waste them, right? We actually need to completely rethink the concept of waste, because actually waste is a very valuable material, as you at Celtic Renewable are actually putting into practice. I mean, it's a fantastic model of waste valorization.
We don't even use the word waste. These are resources. Can we do something more with it? It's like we were washing clothes. You can squeeze the water out before you put it into the dryer. You can squeeze more out, you know, rather than sticking something soaking wet into a hot air dryer. No, you squeeze it out. That's why we've tumble dryers. You know, just get more out, and that's just carbon is like that. Just squeeze more out before you end up doing whatever you have to do to give it end of life.
Sure.
But circular. I also think in terms of when you talk about climate change, we run the risk of climate change fatigue, where people go, oh, here we go again. And the narrative is so much about all the things we can't do, we shouldn't do. Don't eat this, don't fly, don't travel, don't do all the things we can't do. I think we can live our lives. I would like, if my son gets sick, that he can have a medicine, and if it requires a chemical to make it, well, so be it. But could we not make the chemical differently? I think it's about the things that we either need to do or really want to do and won't give up, but doing them differently. And change. The operative word in climate change for me is change. You know? And then, like I said to you, it goes, it's defossilization. Henry Ford famously said, if I asked the public what they wanted, they'd have asked for a faster horse.
Bioeconomy is disrupting the usual way of doing business. And
there's a desire as well. It's not just the innovators. I think there's a genuine desire in the public to see change. As I mentioned yesterday, there's the cost of chemicals, and on the panel you addressed price parity. Well, I would take price and change the word to value. So what is the holistic value of a green chemical? Not the cost. Don't compare pound for pound, euro for euro with something that's made out of oil. What's the total value? What else is it doing for you?
All the externalities that you take into account.
What's it bringing in? It's displacing. It's a new paradigm. It's a paradigm shift, because we're not measuring the destructive value of continuing to use oil.
Martin, do you have a final message to the listeners?
So for the investors, be generous and be quick. And I'm not joking. The fear that I have is that there's too much window dressing about green money and green finance. And ultimately, all things being equal, we will fund the green project rather than another project. But all things have to be equal. Same return of investment, same time period, same lack of risk. Well, they're not equal, you know. And we need to be a little bit bolder and braver in backing these things and believing it, again, the whole value. Why are we doing this? Why is it important? And if you believe it's important, you can back it.